to take a Claritin. Why?
Why?
It's spring. It means Supreme Court season.
Yeah.
Why? Look who's here. It's the author of Injustices, the Supreme Court's History of Comforting the Uncomfortable and Afflicting the Afflicted. Ian Millhiser joins us now. Good morning, Ian Millhiser.
It's good to be here. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
What a fabulous season for your book.
Yeah, no. The trouble is, it seems like any season with this Supreme Court is a timely time for this book.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about the book before, Ian, but it really is a fascinating look with all of the issues that are in the news. You talk about the Supreme Court justices have shaped a nation where children toiled in coal mines, where Americans could be forced into camps because of their race, where a woman could be sterilized against her will by state law. The court was the midwife of Jim Crow and the right hand of Union busters, the dead hand of the Confederacy. And what you argue, interestingly, in the book, you say, nor is the modern court a vast improvement with its incursions on voting rights and its willingness to place elections for sale. I mean, that's really it, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Everything old is new again, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, that's what scares me so much, as I was researching the history of the Supreme Court and then looking at what they're doing now and realizing that we seem to be moving back in this terrifying direction. The impetus for this book is I worked very closely on the first lawsuit, or, I worked against the first lawsuit trying to kill the Affordable Care Act. And when I was writing this book, I mean, I already felt very strongly that support for everyone to have health care. But the stories I found about, a woman whose husband was in a motorcycle accident, he lost their insurance, and so she stopped taking her heart medication, was confined to her bed because they could afford to pay for her medication or to treat his accident. There are doctors I quote in there who said that they used to have to wait for free samples to come in from drug companies, and then all of their patients would beg them for those free samples because it was the only way they could afford drugs.
Oh, my God.
And the idea that the Supreme Court of the United States, and there's a case in front of them right now that presents this issue all over again, where 4 justices were prepared to send us back to this world. It's a monstrosity to think that in the wealthiest nation in the world, that's something that is even on the table.
Well, Ian, that's absolutely right. I mean, not that every case that comes before the Supreme Court is not important, but you're absolutely right. This one is terrifying, and people will die if the ruling goes the wrong way. I mean, there's a piece in HuffPost today, I don't know if you saw it. It says Obamacare is turning 5 years old, and the debate has barely changed. That's how politicized I think our country has become, and the Supreme Court. When you see these right-wing justices, they're parroting sort of right-wing talking points, and it's more about politics, right? Than I love remember the last exchange we talked about where Scalia said, "Oh well, Congress will just fix it," and the lawyer said, "This Congress," and got a laugh.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, the thing about the Supreme Court though is that they've really always been this way. I mean, like, what's scary is that the Roberts Court, the court that we live with right now, is not an anomaly. I mean, go back to all of the great battles in the 20th century, including things you wouldn't even think would have to be battles. There were these southern cotton mill owners that I write about in the book in the early 20th century. And their goal, I'm not making this up, was grown men were too expensive to hire, so they wanted to replace all of their adult workers with children. That was their goal, was children for people. And Congress mucked that up for them by passing this silly child labor law saying they couldn't do it. So what did these folks do? They went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, said we couldn't have a national child labor law in this country.
Yeah.
So there's, I mean, long as, for over 100 years, the Supreme Court has been this way.
Ian, I mean, the thing that strikes me is this whole, 2 sets of facts, quote unquote, except that, all the facts are I mean, Obamacare is unqualified success. I mean, there's no way you can spin. I'm just reading the percentage of adults without health insurance has dropped to 12.9%, according to Gallup, lowest they've ever recorded. It's brought insurance to 16.4 million people that wouldn't otherwise have it. The budget deficit's coming down, according to the CBO. The Affordable Care Act has contributed significantly to that reduction. Overall health costs are rising at historically low rates. Look at the unemployment rate. And yet, again, Ian, the rhetoric doesn't change. Republicans keep saying it's a disaster, it's a train wreck, it's a job killer. And it is provably not so. And yet, I don't know what you're feeling is going to happen. What do you think is going to happen in the Burwell case?
I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic about this King v. Burwell case, the case that's up in front right now, trying to kill the court, largely because Justice Kennedy made some comments where he indicated that if he lets Obamacare slide, he could win some other conservative battles that he's been fighting for a really long time, and I guess he wants that more. But yeah, I mean, the point that you make about how it seems like we're operating under two sets of facts, one thing that I actually spend a bit of time discussing in Injustices is what the most recent research has to say about our brain. And basically what it says is that we have a remarkable capacity to convince ourselves that things that we really, really want to be true are true. And when a politician does that, when a politician convinces themselves that Obamacare is bad because they really, really want it to be bad, at least we have the option of voting them out of office. But when a Supreme Court justice does that, they're there for life, and there's nothing we can do about it. So, Justice Scalia seems to be getting more, his views are getting harder and harder as he ages, and he's going to be there, until he decides to leave, which will probably be never, or until he dies.
Yeah.
So, the problem is that, human beings really aren't well equipped to have that kind of power. It doesn't matter if they're liberal or conservative, to be made one of 9 philosopher kings with no way to remove them. That's a scary thing to put an end to.
That's right. And here's the personal part for me is, the other big case, of course, we have coming up in June is marriage equality. And, you've got people like Scalia still parroting these just sort of archaic talking points. And I'm thinking, I'm a gay American. I have to wait till June to find out, if I'm going to have the same rights as every American. And like you say, I mean, that's what's terrifying. And again, I know that you're optimistic on that ruling as well. But, like you say, the fact that it comes down to these few human beings is, and maybe in that case, one human being, right?
Right. Yeah. In that case, it all comes down to Justice Kennedy. Yeah. And, I mean, yes, I am optimistic that finally in 2015, we're going to get to have marriage equality in this country. But I don't really see the fact that it took this long as some great victory. I mean, in 1965, which was the same year that Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act, I quote a letter in Injustices that an early civil rights group wrote, not wanting to marry. What they wanted is that it was against the law for the federal government to hire openly gay people.
Yeah.
And they wanted to get rid of that policy. And this letter is just shocking. I mean, it talks about how we're not going to get rid of this policy because people are revolted by gay people and we don't want our kids exposed to them. I mean, it is the most atrocious. I mean, if the Family Research Council wrote it, you think it was over the top.
Yeah.
And those were the views of the federal government, and the Supreme Court did nothing. I mean, when Bowers v. Hardwick came up in the 1980s, they even said that gay people don't have a right to have sex.
Yeah,
So,
Well,
no, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, it was interesting. Our friend Kerry Washington, Olivia Pope, as we know her, we used to have her on the show. She was awesome when she was, traveling the country as an Obama surrogate, and she just won a GLAAD award, the gay. In her acceptance speech, she said, in 1997, when Ellen DeGeneres made her famous declaration, it took place in an America where the Defense of Marriage Act had just passed months earlier. Civil unions were not legal in any state. Yeah. But also remember, in just 30 years before that, the Supreme Court was deciding that the ban against interracial marriage was unconstitutional. Up until then, heterosexual people of different races couldn't marry who they wanted to marry either. So when black people today say they don't believe in gay marriage, the first thing that I say is, please don't let anybody try to get you to vote against your own best interest by feeding you messages of hate. And then I say, people used to say things about that about you and your love.
Right.
Do you think that argument's going to resonate, obviously, in the Supreme Court that so many people have cited loving, right, in this fight?
Yeah. So here's the thing with this Supreme Court. I mean, we've got 4 justices who I think are genuinely bought into the civil rights struggle on gay rights. And then you have Justice Kennedy, and I don't know why this seems to tweak his liberty bone, but Justice Kennedy's a pretty emotional guy.
Yeah.
And he seems to have the right emotional reaction here when gay rights comes up. His reactions on health care have been terrible. His reactions on Citizens United was terrible. He helped strike down the Voting Rights Act. But on gay rights, he thinks that gay people are fabulous. And so, the main reason I'm optimistic is because it happens to be the case that one of these philosopher kings happens on this one issue. It's the one issue that he's good on.
Yeah. Boy, just one more thing before we go here, Ian. When we talk about how politicized this country has become, here's the president about his attorney general nominee, Loretta Lynch.
It has been more than 4 months since I nominated Loretta Lynch to serve as attorney general. And this time, Republican leaders in Congress won't even let her nomination come up for a vote. In fact, by Monday, Loretta will have been languishing on the Senate floor for longer than the 7 previous attorney generals combined. Senators from both parties say they support her. This is purely about politics. Republicans promised that Congress would function smoothly with them in charge. Here's a small chance for them to prove it.
I mean, when Rudy Giuliani says stop being a jerk, confirm her, there is something, and again, I overuse the phrase unprecedented, Ian, but, this is just, we've never held up an attorney general for other issues, right? That don't have to do with the qualifications.
That we're having to have this fight over Loretta Lynch, who she herself is not controversial at all, just shows how much worse things are going to get the next time we have a Supreme Court seat come open. I've talked about how the court has become so political, and, in my book I talk about all the history of how it's been politicized in the past. But there are a lot of people in this country who want to make it even more political, and that includes the majority of the Senate. So, God help us when Ginsburg, or for that matter, Scalia dies, and there could be a change in the who controls the majority of the court. I don't know if we were going to be able to get anyone confirmed. That's what I think this nonsense about Loretta Lynch is teaching us.
Yep, absolutely.